Hey guys, so in this episode of Make It with Calvin, I'm going to talk you through taking this block of urethane foam here and turning it into the core for the charcoal kiln project. So let's dive into it. So the emphasis of this video will strictly be on creating the core, so if you want to watch any of the other videos on this project, feel free to do so. That's your disclaimer. A quick rundown on first the material and then the machining process. To start out with, this is urethane foam, which is different than the extruded polystyrene foam or the expanded polystyrene, depending upon which style you're purchasing, that you can get at most home improvement stores. Now, some of them will actually sell this urethane foam. It tends to come in between foil on both sides. And the main advantage of this is it's a lot more chemical resistant. And it also has a bit more density, if you will. The drawback, I will say, is this is definitely a lot more grainy. So keep that in mind. It is somewhat fragile. The main reason why I'm using this over something like RenShape is purely the availability, the cost, and the ease of machining. Nothing against RenShape, it's an amazing product, which is a much more dense urethane foam, but the problem is it's not cheap, and because it's more dense means it is a little bit more difficult to machine. That said though, you can get a much better surface finish, so pick your battles, but this did the job for me. So with the block of urethane foam, what I opted to do was create what I like to call a carrier. So this one is just a solid piece of 1/4 inch thick Luan plywood. On the versions that actually got machined, I cut a clearance hole, if you will, in the middle of them, so I didn't have to machine through the wood to then get into the foam. Because of the chemical resistance of this, I was able to take some CA glue, super glue, and attach the foam block to the base. You can't do that with normal styrene-based foam. It will dissolve it. And with that mounted on there, I was able to toss it into the mill and get machining. But before we get to the epic montage of machining this, let me talk you through a little bit of the machining strategy. Mostly because my mill is an absolute pain when it comes to changing tools, I opted to use one tool for the whole machining process. Yes, using a 1/4 inch end mill for everything is not the most efficient, but I only had a handful of these to make, and I figured it was worth the extra time. So, being that I'm creating a round item out of a square block, step one was to take the square block and turn it into a round shape. Now, normally you would just take the block and jump straight into machining your rough profile with an end mill, but in this application, I decided it was actually more efficient to come along and just rough the square into a cylinder, face the top, and then jump into roughing the steps in there. I definitely was way more conservative with my feeds and speeds and depths than I could have been. My main concern was I did not know how well this was going to behave, if it was going to be, chipping out giant pieces or things like that. So that's the main reason why I took my time when doing this. Once I got the rough shape of this down, I came along with the end mill and had it rough the shape out. So you'll see it with the kind of like the terraced pattern on it. Once that was done, it was time to finish. Now, partly referencing the fact that my mill is a pain in the butt when it comes to changing tools, and the fact that I didn't have a very thick bottom piece, I opted to use a flat end mill for creating the final profile. Ideally, you want to use at least a bullnose end mill, which has a corner radius, or a full ball nose end mill, depending upon your application. But for this, I was able to get more than decent enough results just using the flat end mill. Definitely took a little bit longer, but you know what? It's a trade-off. Like I say, I'm only making a handful of these. If I had a machine that had easier tool changes and stuff, I totally would have used other tools, but I digress. So let's cut to the machining montage of Op 1, and then we'll come back and talk about the challenges for hollowing out the inside, also known as Op 2. Okay, so now it's time to tackle op 2, which is hollowing out the inside. Because we have the opening in the back here and we have the opening in the front here, orientation of this part for op 2 was absolutely critical, because the last thing we want to do is start hollowing out a hole on the wrong side and the whole piece is ruined. So what I did is I made sure to mark the front and rear, and I also ran the program above the part for the first operation, for the first little part, so it'd be really easy to tell if we were cutting out the opening in the correct area. Doesn't hurt to do that, especially with something like this where I have limited material. Last thing you want to do is screw it up on op 2 and have to start over. So the process was pretty much the same as op 1. The only tricky part is the fact that this part is taller than the vise jaws that I currently have, and my attempt at creating some 3D printed soft jaws was an absolute disaster, partly because I had the spacing wrong for the bolt holes, and partly just some printing challenges at the 11th hour before I came down to do this project. So all that aside, I was able to hack something together using some hardboard, so that's why you have that. Also, I'm sorry if you can't really see down into the center of this. You really didn't miss much, but because of camera constraints, that's why it is that way. That said though, I still used the same 1/4 inch end mill from the previous operations and had it first rough the shape in there and then come along and finish it to a pretty nice degree. So that is the machining steps for this. I do have to say that I definitely will be doing more projects with foam like this in the future, but I think I am definitely going to look into setting up some kind of suction mechanism using lock line or a similar setup so I can try and suck up as much of that dust as it's being produced, partly because it is messy and partly just because I really don't want to be breathing it in. That said though, if you have experience working with urethane foam, Ren shape, or something similar for creating parts like this, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on it. Obviously, if I had something like a Haas mini mill, something like that, could totally have done things differently, but I do like the challenge of doing things on a less than ideal setup, as I feel it really pushes you to learn and try new things, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you here next time on Make It with Calvin with another part of this charcoal kiln project.